redefined how it operates and reinvigorated itself into one of the most dynamic Landcare groups in the country. Pip will share the experiences of the challenges that they faced and what steps that they took as a group to ensure that Little River Landcare not only thrived, but went on to become one of the most successful Landcare groups in the country. Now, just checking that things are working right here. Right, sorry. The challenges and issues that Pip will discuss are common to many Landcare and farming systems groups around the country. And while each situation is unique, the story of Little River Landcare should provide valuable points for consideration and further discussion as groups look to the future. Now, I'd just like to go through an overview of how today's webinar will work, and for some reason I'm just having a few challenges with the screen here, getting it to move on to a separate onto another screen. Interesting. Now, if people would hold with me just for one moment, I seem to have a bit of a problem with my screen. Here we go. Sorry. Now, with today's, just to give you some background on today's technology, which I've got off to a rocky start, you'll see that I've got a copy of the control panel that appears on your screen. And you'll be able to see that it'll be fully expanded to begin with, but after a few minutes it'll hide itself so that you can concentrate on the presentation. If you need it back at any time, just click on the little yellow button at the top and it'll pop back up. In relation to audio options today, you can use, most people will be using the speakers on your computer, or you can use the telephone. If you have any problems at all, you can click on the telephone option and use the phone number, access code and PIN numbers that are provided. If you have any troubles at all on your computer, please use the phone option, but just note it's not toll-free. Most people shouldn't have any problems with today as we're not using any webcams. However, if for some reason you do experience any major issues, a link to the recording of the webinar will be sent to everyone who registered. And just before we start, get involved, ask a question. We want today's webinar to be as interactive as possible, so please ask whatever questions you like. Only we can see your questions, so don't hesitate. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can today, but we'll get a response to all the questions up on our website soon. To ask a question, type it into the question panel near the bottom of your control panel, and we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Pip Job. Pip's well known to many people in Landcare in New South Wales, but Pip is a local landholder in the Cumnock district in New South Wales and has been with Little River Landcare since December 2004. Pip and her husband Selwyn produce shorthorn and Charolais beef cattle using holistic management principles and are dedicated on-farm conservationists, protecting remnant vegetation and its associated flora and fauna. Pip and Selwyn are also part of MLA's Target 100 program. I'd like to hand over to you, Pip.
Thank you, Brett. I hope everyone can hear me and my computer works properly. Well, thanks for the introduction, Brett, and I will talk about, as you said, the challenges that we're going through. And it looks like I'm going to have an IT challenge with my presentation moving on.
Just give it a few moments and hopefully it'll right itself.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Brett. I started with Little River back in 2004 as, at that time, just an administration assistant, and then moved on to being the educations manager, and these days I'm the CEO. So it's been a progression of movement. Brett, is my presentation moving on at all on your end?
Not as yet. Just give it a moment, Pip. Now I'll give it a go. Give it a try now. Here we go.
It's moved. Great.
Here we are.
Okay, so the Little River catchment, we're located in the central west of New South Wales, and the beautiful picture that we have there, that's the Little River, and we've had Department of Fisheries tell us that the Little River is one of the most pristine systems in the entire Murray-Darling Basin. So that's a great testament that we hold on to. Our catchment sits, we're sort of in the mid-section of the Macquarie River system. So for those of you on the other side of the nation, the Macquarie River drains into the iconic Macquarie Masters. So we sit upstream of Dubbo, and overall our catchment drains 320,000 hectares, and the land management practice in our catchment is predominantly mixed farming. We've got beef, lamb production, wool production, and then cropping such as wheat, oats and canola. We only have about 3% of our catchment that works with irrigation, so it's predominantly just dry land farm practices. So today I'm going to talk about our 15-year history, and having a look back those 15 years we've identified 4 key stages, and as you can see there, they're the ones that I'm going to talk about today, what they meant and how they were overcome, and then where we are today. So the first little one that we had, that first key critical point, was back in 1997, 1998, and we had a couple of people, they were landholders and other sort of visionaries who were champions, and they ranged from people that were working for government departments, Landcare facilitators at that, and they saw the need to have an integrated approach towards Landcare on a catchment scale instead of the little sort of Landcare social clusters that had been established about 10 years before that. So Little River had about 20 little independent Landcare groups operating across that catchment mass, and everyone came together as a community and discussed the concept, and it was seen as a very favourable movement forward. It certainly didn't replace those little groups at the time, it just worked, I guess, as an umbrella with those groups, and encouraged them to remain independent, and allowed, I guess, with that approach that, you know, bigger projects could be delivered, and where there were social gaps, those people could be included into Landcare. And back at that time, it was very traditional in that volunteer-driven. It was about people that were just passionate about what was happening at the time. They decided to break that 320,000 hectares into 4 subcatchments, and sort of representation came from those 4 subcatchments to create the committee, plus anyone else who just had a passion for Landcare and what was happening. From there, that group of volunteers for the next couple of years worked on addressing predominantly dry land salinity. That's a massive issue in our catchment as a land management issue, and they secured about $500,000 over those few years in sort of your classic tree planting projects, education to upskill people on how to manage dry land salinity, and sowing of salt-tolerant pastures, those types of things. They created in 2000 a catchment management plan, which was identified as being a very innovative document of its time. And that catchment management plan identified some of the best management options for our catchment, the cost-benefit analysis of participating in those, and what it would mean to the landscape to adopt all those best management options. And it became a template for landholders to look at how they can manage different aspects of their property, and what impact they would have for downstream landholders. And effectively that time was really about building the networks of the organisation and the linkages that it had to lots of other individuals, organisations, all those stakeholders that are out there. They used a government employee to help them write a project at that time, and it was probably a project that was a little more complex than they had usually done in the past, and that was.
I think I've just forwarded that on. Right. You want to go back?
No, it's only by just a second. It's all right. And that project was called the Message Project, So that takes us onto the slide that we've moved on to, which is the next sort of key time frame that happened for the organisation. So when that project came through and it was successful, it was only a $300,000 project. It coincided with a point in the organisation's history where they started to see a little bit of volunteer burnout. And so a lot of the same people had been involved since 1997, and you know, over time and over personal situations, people do get a bit tired. They were struggling to find someone to step up to take on the role of chairperson, and then there was a struggle to get someone to take the secretarial role. And because the organisation was still in its infancy, you know, finances weren't abundant. So it created sort of a complex issue at that time about how were they going to deliver this project that was a lot more complex than projects that they'd had in the past. So they approached Mid-Macquarie Landcare to obtain some funds to put on a secretary, and they received $12,000 to do that. And the purpose of that secretary was to allow the organisation to become a little bit professional so that it could then go on to employ a catchment manager who would work under that message project. And effectively, I guess that was sort of a key point in time as to how the organisation became a lot more professional and moved away from that sort of traditional volunteer type organisation that it was. So from 2004 all the way through until 2011, we call that our massive climb period. With that of a team of staff members, it really took the organisation into more of a business model than just sort of a not-for-profit clunky sort of approach, and it really developed the professional capacity of what we could do. By having an office front, by having staff members, we were able to create, you know, trust and respect with our landholders and with the community, and that meant that we started having people coming in to share their ideas, project concepts, what their challenges were, and we could actually engage on a much closer social level with our community and really understand them, understand the challenges that not just for farms and businesses but for families. And we just started to understand the actual community dynamics that we had to work within in the Little River Landcare catchment area. So over the period of time, we obtained about $4 million in funding, and that's sort of projects that varied from $1 million in size right down to sort of $2,000 projects. And with everything that was going on, that combination of understanding our community, the different types of projects, and we were writing projects that were suggested by our members, we were able to act very spontaneously to any of the needs that were identified. And because we'd created such a strong network, as soon as there was an issue, we could get on the phone, we knew who to ring, we could get money to do a field day, we could get advice onto farms. So everything was sort of happening very quickly, a very, very exciting time, and that's sort of really when the organisation started to hum. And I think that's where we started becoming quite a recognised organisation within New South Wales. Then in 2011 came the fall, and for me personally, this was a very emotional time because I've lived through it, and I know how traumatic it was, and I think there is so much learning just from this one episode that I'm about to speak about for all organisations. Over the previous couple of years before 2011, job security was a major issue, and I think all not-for-profit groups, whether it's Landcare or anyone else, can identify with this, that funding streams are short. Not very often do you have a funding program that leads, you know, tidily and neatly into another program. So you have these gaps that are formed where just job security is not there, and it's terribly hard for volunteer not-for-profit groups to work out planning strategies that, you know, enable their staff to feel that they are secure. It takes a lot of thinking about how to overcome those issues, but because of the job security issues that we had been having, we lost 2 key staff members from the organisation. One in particular was our executive officer at that time, and with him leaving, it opened up this massive void where it became very apparent that there was a complete lack of succession planning put in place. How would the organisation even just deal with that that situation And then it also showed that we had some gaps, just in terms of the management committee succession planning. Unfortunately, all these sorts of things happened at the same time that we had someone that in the chair position that was not as skilled as we probably required. He was there because he was passionate and he felt, that someone had to step up to the plate. And it was just sort of a combination of more volunteer burnout. And because of that burnout, you start to lose a bit of passion and vision. We had the challenges of that we probably weren't managing our finances as well as we should have been. And then it created all this imbalance. And the decision was made, it's probably easier to close our doors at this point in time and maybe come back to it down the track when there was more people that were passionate or there was more funding. And as I said, it was a very traumatic period. But then something really interesting happened, and we decided to call a public meeting, and we had about 70 to 80 members of the organisation turned up to this meeting. And it was really interesting to listen to our members because they told the organisation, they told the management committee something very interesting. And they said it's not about project money. It's got nothing to do with that. It's not about having funds to do projects on their farms. The value of our organisation was the social conduit that it brought to the community, particularly with our communities. We've lost, New South Wales Farmers sub-branches. We've had Country Women's Association branches closed down. Some of the sporting organisations have closed up. So what we were providing was such important stuff to the fabric of bringing people together. That message then sent a bit of a wave through the community, and people put their hands up to say, don't close it, we'll take on the challenges. And that's what happened. We ended up with a new management committee that came into play at our next AGM. And the interesting thing there that came about all that is, okay, it's great to have people that are passionate and interested in land care on your management committees, but we had a skill shortage, and we needed to find people who do those skills. So that's what we set out to do. We headhunted people and we invited them to be on the committee, and it's created this position now where we're on this massive rise because we're using strategic thinking. Our financial planning is extremely strong now. We have very strong positive leadership in our chairperson and the entire management committee. We've got leadership happening here from our staff team, and it's a really positive, exciting place to be, and it's really rewarding as the CEO to be working with this great management committee base. We still have our challenges. There's still lack of job security, and we have still got financial uncertainty, and I think they're two things that will probably always be in the not-for-profit sector, but we are being strategic about how we look at those and how we manage them. So today, as part of overcoming those challenges, we're looking at how we seek, oh goodness, I've gone too far there, how we're seeking partnerships. So instead of just looking at government funding programs, we're looking at corporate relationships. We've been having very successful discussions with our local governments, so the councils. We cover 5 council boundaries, and we're also exploring our philanthropic opportunities. We're looking at trading activities, so what are the things that we have that are marketable that we can sell outside of our catchment in terms of programs that we've delivered in the past, and anything else that we can find that provides an opportunity for us. We're constantly looking at how we can refine our competitive advantage, and that's kind of the reality of where we are in the natural resource management sector. We're constantly developing many projects, and we're really holistic about how we look at projects. We will explore anything that's environmental, social or economic, and we're really fostering the relationships for the future, and that's not just in our own catchment. We're looking nationally, internationally. Where can we develop a relationship? Does it have a financial opportunity for us? Does it have a volunteer opportunity for us? Or is it just in terms of building our public profile? So we're working on all these things as part of our strategic plan. So some of the things that make us successful is, so our catchment, we are 320,000 hectares, we have a 75% engagement rate. So that means 240,000 hectares is covered by our membership, and it equates to about 480 individual members and 175 businesses. And we map all that spatially, so we can see what that looks like on maps, which is a really powerful reporting process. Some of the things that make us successful, we can go into these in the Q&A session if people want to flesh these out, but it's our efficiency, how we're able to do things, our effectiveness of how we do those things, the diffusion of red tape, and I think this is one of the most valuable assets that we have as Landcare, is that we can diffuse the red tape from government programs and make them farmer friendly, make them landholder friendly. We're so spontaneous that we can just adapt very quickly to floods and fires. If it's depression, cash flow issues, we can just respond as they need to happen. And we're grassroots driven. Our membership tell us what they want, how they want it, and we do that. And then, there's that chain that we can take it to a Central West level, we can take it to a state level, and further if we need to. Our financial efficiency is an interesting one, and I think this is something that all groups need to look at. A 15-year average for us, in every dollar that we receive, we're spending 90 cents on ground works and educational programs. So that means that we're only using 9 cents in each dollar on administration, which is salary and operating expenses. So as I said, that's a 15-year average. We're looking at, we are going to increase that administration component to 12% as a rolling average for the next 5 years, because when you stop and you have a look at just simple things like CPI, just the cost of running an organisation, of employing staff, the reality is that it's increasing, and we can't keep looking back at the last 15 years saying we have to stay at that level. The world of funding is different. The way that projects are delivered now is completely different. But it's still, like even at 12%, I think it's a very commendable use of funds and the influence that we can make out of the remaining cents in terms of changing landscape, changing land practice and thinking is essential. And it's such a powerful message for Landcare to get that across in terms of value for money. Some of the different approaches that we've had in terms of projects, we've done all the classic natural resource management stuff, from soil carbon, grazing management, biodiversity, riparian, salinity, conservation, cropping. You can name it all. We've either had a crack at it or we're about to. But some of the different stuff that we've done is we've targeted the mental health stuff. So in the drought that we've had, goodness me, I don't want to remember it. It was back sort of from 2004 all the way through to about 2008, 2009. But in 2006, there was a lot of farmer suicides going on in the central west of New South Wales. And the management committee set a target that they would not lose one of their farmers to suicide, and that they would change the stigma of mental health in our region. And I think the organisation's greatest accomplishment to date is that we have not lost one of our members to suicide. We had all sorts of information days. We made it very public that anyone can walk into our office, come and have a coffee. You can say whatever you like. You wouldn't be judged. We would help you as much as we can, and that we were very open for that to happen. Because effectively, Landcare is people care, and if we don't look after our people, they're not going to be able to engage themselves in natural resource management. So it's something that we've become very, very passionate about, and spend a lot of time analysing our community and responding when we identify that there's issues. Some of the other bits and pieces we've done is our target towards engaging farming women in natural resource management and giving them the confidence to become active decision makers in farming businesses in their community. Unfortunately, there is sort of an old traditional pattern that happened in rural communities where women, the role of women is old-fashioned, and so we've worked very hard at trying to showcase to our women that are amazing people to have involved in natural resource management. They have a natural intuition towards the landscape, but that they are holistic thinkers in terms of being involved in their businesses, and that they are key decision makers, and that they have to have the confidence in themselves to do that. So we've run all sorts of events, sort of 2-day training programs to 1-day forums, showcasing what it means for a woman to be highly active, a big decision maker, and making an influence in their business and to their community. It's been a very fun program to be involved in. But I guess before we go over to the Q&A session, some of our key messages, as I touched on before, listen to your people. Don't make the assumptions that you actually know what your people want. You actually have to bring them together, give them the platform to speak freely and openly, and take it on. As I said, we learnt a big message that it's not about funding and on-farm projects. It's actually about being social conduits. And Landcare is really essential right across our communities in doing that. You have to match the scale to your organisation's capacity, and we will discuss this in the Q&A a little bit further. It becomes strategic, not just planners. There is a difference, and becoming strategic about the future is a missing ingredient that is happening in not just Landcare Groups, but a lot of community-owned organisations. You have to look after your staff. As management committees, by demonstrating that you are constantly looking forward about how are we going to meet funding gaps, what are our critical deadlines, what are we going to do to ensure that we can retain staff or make workplace flexibility to overcome gaps, that will demonstrate to your staff that you're serious, that you care for them, and that you're doing everything in your capacity. You don't want to lose people because they don't feel that there's security and that they don't have a role in the long-term future. You know, staff don't know it if you don't tell them. Seek a skills-based committee, because passion cannot be sustained. We've learnt that on a number of occasions, and the value that we've gotten by seeking people that are skills-based in the last 12 months has yielded this organisation so much more than could have been anticipated. So I will endorse that very, very strongly. Plan for succession, both your staff members and committee members. Always act with integrity, honour your word and respect everyone, and that is key when it comes to servicing your membership. If you have those basic things, you will not have any problems engaging the landholders in your community. They will want to work with you. Always think outside of the box. It's easier said than done, and this is where when you start bringing people together that have different skill sets, you'll be amazed at what they suggest, experiences that they've had in the past, and what you can do to either grab those ideas or manipulate them to create something that's new and innovative. And big one at the end, don't take no for an answer. We all have a voice, and we have to get that across very strongly. I know a lot of Landcare groups, and particularly smaller ones, don't want to take on that advocacy type role, but if you want to affect change in terms of the way that we deal with, whether it's local government or catchment scale government or state or federal, we have to get that across. We have to have our voice and make sure that our leaders know it and respond to it. And the other one I was going to throw in there that I didn't have just noted was that use your networks. The number of times that I have made a phone call or sent an email to other groups that I regard as being leaders and asked for advice, copies of whether it's employment agreements, policies, projects that they've done, monitoring templates, you name it, just ask. You know, everyone's willing to share, and at worst you'll get a no, sorry, we don't want to share that, just try another group. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It'll save you a lot of time, and you'll be amazed at how generous land carers are. So that's it for my presentation, Brett. So I'll hand it back to you, and I hope there's some questions.
Thanks, Pip. Great presentation. And while we're giving some time for people to get some more questions in, there's a couple of points I'd like to just draw out a little bit more, if that's okay, Pip.
Sure.
First one relates to what I see is probably one of the main differences with Little River and how it's, in essence, restructured itself in a more contemporary sense, as opposed to whether it's a lot of other Landcare groups or a lot of other local community organisations still very much have a structure of what was there 25 years ago. Do you mind just giving us a quick rundown of, you say now you have a management group. Well, how is that structured, and sort of why have you gone down that path? You talked about skills base. Could you just unpack that a bit more, how that relates to where you were?
Okay. What we used to have, when we had representation from each of the subcatchments, we took on another region a couple of years ago. So that meant that our committee was up to 15 people. And I don't have to begin to explain how complex that becomes when you're having 15 people all on a committee. So last year we redesigned that. We've dropped it back to a minimum of 7, maximum of 9. 7 are elected at the AGM, and it leaves space for 2 people to be co-opted. What we looked at was where were our deficiencies? What did we need? And obviously I've highlighted it. Financial management was a big one for us. So we went out and headhunted that person to fill that role in terms of being on the committee, and then obviously that person has taken on our treasurer's role. We targeted someone with public relations, media expertise because we had a deficiency in that area. So like we went through the organisation, said what functions do we service, where are our weaknesses, and who do we need to fill those gaps. And then with the 2 co-opted roles that we had, once we had those appointed roles and we looked at who we had and what their strengths were, we then realised that we had an opportunity to appoint someone in that had HR skills, so human resources skills, and then we co-opted someone that has had extensive experience working in the government sector and writing funding submissions, that type of experience. So yeah, it's quite different to how we were, and as I said, it's yielding great results.
Yeah, thanks, Pip. Do you also have people that, you know, if you've got, you mentioned the mental health project and other ones, people that are responsible for specific projects rather than taking on an actual position, if you know what I mean, like treasurer, secretary, that sort of thing?
Sure.
Do you actually have treasurers and secretaries now?
Yes, we have 1 chair, 2 vice chairs, secretary and a treasurer, and that fits within our constitutional requirements. But when we sat down last year and did our strategic plan, we allowed all of our management committee members to put their name down for wherever they saw they fit. And our strategic plan sort of covers, you know, different ways of gaining additional funding, how we can focus on NRM objectives and achieve high-level on-ground works, supporting our local community, particularly community health and wellbeing, and the 4th one is about how we maintain a high profile. And, you know, under each one of the 4 main objectives, we have up to sort of 12 or 15 different ways that we can approach that. So the committee members got to put their names down against things that they were either really passionate about or that they had skills that they could contribute to. So it helps in terms of it relieves a little bit of workload out of the office, that we have committee members who are passionate about something and doing it. And I think that gives them a sense of reward as well, that they can contribute to something and see it from its conceptual point right through to actual delivery. And, you know, I work collaboratively with those, as do some of our other staff members. And, yeah, so it's not so much a case that people get allocated a role, but that they allocate themselves where they feel their role is.
Thanks, Pip. And quickly, just before we move on to the Q&A questions that are coming in, 2 other points. You mentioned the issue around funding and lessons that have been learned in relation to seeking funding that meets your needs, not the other way around, and the scales of organisations, and, you know, what the funding opportunities that might appeal to you as a larger group. Yeah, the lessons of sort of you always have to go big, or what's your learnings in that area?
Look, Little River, whether they consciously made the decision many, many years ago, has gone big because I think that's effectively what part of the idea of going to a catchment scale organisation was all those years ago, and how you actually bring about change not just on one farm or a little cluster of farms, but how you bring it about on a whole catchment scale. So that sort of meant that we've always had to apply for bigger projects, and I think because we had the skills and the capacity to actually develop projects at that scale and deliver projects at that scale, you know, we sort of target, you know, the $1 million projects, and not everyone can handle that. If you don't have staff with that skill set, if you don't have governance, if you don't have financial management, if you don't have all that in place, let alone the engagement rate, you will really struggle as an organisation. And so it's probably not best to try and think big. It's probably best to think about how do we put the stepping stones in place to get to that point in time. But in saying that, where we are now, we probably operate at a higher risk than we did 9 years ago. Because we're targeting those big projects, we have now placed ourselves into a whole new different you know, competition ground, I guess, in terms we are now competing against government organisations, councils, universities, industry bodies like the Sugarcane Growers Association, or, you know, Meat and Livestock Australia. We're now competing against some really big players who have scale, who have funds to leverage in a project, and often have, you know, a bigger capacity to bring in alliances because they've already been in place over years and years. So for us to now write funding programs, we have to be quite careful about how we plan, how we are going to overcome our scale, how do we leverage any money that we can put into a project. And being a not-for-profit, we don't usually have a lot of cash that we can throw in there. And how do we leverage the in-kind value of our project participants. So it takes a lot of work, and it's high risk, and we're now, our success rate in funding applications has reduced. We're now we're sitting at about 50% success rate now, where once upon a time we were up around that 70% success rate. So it's, you know, it's great to get $1 million project, but it takes a lot of work to get there and a lot of knocks before you get there. Does that cover that well enough, Brett?
Yeah, yep. How do you make the decision, Pip, though, if, and it's obviously, I suppose, difficult when people are needing resources to maintain their group, but how do you actually make the decision, and I suppose see is the importance of the decision about which funding to apply for, so you're not, in essence, just on the treadmill?
Yes.
Of chasing funding that might be your core business.
Yeah, I could spend hours writing funding applications. Yeah, look, it's probably the first thing that we've been looking at is what's the ratio that we can access towards administration costs and salary. We have seen over the last couple of years a lot of them are capped at 10%, and it's quite inhibitive. The bigger the project becomes, there's a lot more work that goes into it, particularly when it comes to the Mary-based activities. So we have to weigh that up very carefully as to how can this project staff itself and also contribute towards, you know, running the organisation. And so that's the first thing we're looking at, is what's the capped ratio, and also does it actually target something that's of interest to our farmers. There's a lot of programs that are developed, but they may not hit the needs of our farmers. We can write projects, lodge them if they're to a target that isn't of interest, but we'll probably have troubles engaging our farmers in the delivery. So that's the second most important thing that we look at. Then from there, we're not, like, it doesn't put us off having to write huge, substantial applications. We can do that relatively easy. And I guess it has to be, we have to be able to work with lots of people within the project. We tend not to do the sort of one landholder based projects. or just where the outcomes are quite small. We're trying to sort of achieve a balance right across our catchment where a lot of people can feel like they're being involved and being engaged.
Yep. Thanks very much for that, Pip. Now we'll just move into the Q&A session. Now we've got a large number of questions, so I'm going to have to paraphrase a number of those, and with Pip's permission, what we'll do is try and also get replies to the questions like we've done in previous webinars and put them up on the website later on.
Sure.
Now, Pip, there's a number of questions here relating to how Little River operates, and one of them, I suppose, touches on what tools or processes has Little River employed or used to try and identify the needs of their community.
Talking to people. That's probably the most important thing. I think because as staff and as management committee, we all live in our catchment. We're all very engaged. Our staff members all volunteer in the community in all sorts of different ways, whether it's show societies, school, PNFs, or whatever it might be. So we're constantly talking to people, and I don't, like after 5 o'clock, I don't say to people, sorry, I don't do Landcare. Like I'm always talking to people, always finding out what's driving their needs. People always will say something that provides you with a point of opening up a discussion about something, and it's using that information. We also liaise a lot with the local agronomists that work with the rural supplies centres, our local ministers. It's networking with anyone that works with your people and finding out what are they seeing, what are they feeling. Intuition's an amazing thing to use, and we use it a lot. And it gives you all sorts of indications as to where people are sitting. And as I said, the mental health stuff is really, really critical. So if you can get a gauge of where people are at that way, then it tells you what's the response that you need to have. Other than that, when we have meetings, we're always asking people for project ideas. We've done surveys. Whenever we survey the membership, whether it's about a particular project or whether it's about what value for money do they see in our membership, whatever it might be, we've always got the questions in there at the end, like how can we serve you better, what do you need, what issues are you dealing with, and using that stuff and always looking at it and trying to respond as much as we can to what the people tell us.
Pip, before I go back to that question on mental health, this probably moves on to the question of, does Little River have a plan? How old is it? And how often is it reviewed, and does it actually help?
Okay. So in 2000 they established a catchment management plan. That was very focused on sort of your geophysical, your classic sort of environmental stuff. I look at that plan now, go 13 years later, it misses 2 essential components. It misses the social stuff and it misses the economic stuff. I've been trying to get funding to help us update it, but none of those has been successful so far. But what we do use now is, last year there was a strategic plan created a couple of years ago, but we've started reviewing that annually now. So we set a very rigorous one last year, and we actually just reviewed that last week. 12 months later, we looked at what did we achieve against that strategic plan, what do we need to modify for the next 12 months, and what did we miss? Where are the gaps? And we've set that down. So my role, I guess what makes Little River slightly different as well on a staffing front is that being employed as a CEO changes what's expected of me versus if I was just a Landcare facilitator. I wear a lot of weight now here on the delivery of all these things, of developing the strategic plans and being accountable to our management committee on those. So, as I said, we reviewed the strategic plan last week that I put forward to them. There was a couple of slight modifications, and now I've got the green light to go ahead for the next 12 months and make that one happen. So that's probably the key plan that we're using at the moment. In terms of that catchment management plan, I do keep a report there of all of our projects, how do they align with the catchment management plan. It has a number of objectives in it and all the activities that would help to achieve that objective. So we've sort of got a running tally there of how we are performing based on that plan. But as I said, it's missing the social and the economic components that we now understand are so essential to achieving natural resource management.
Well, Pip, just before I move on to that, though, do you find that the planning actually does help, though? Or
it's essential.
Not enough in its current form?
It is essential. If you don't have a plan, you really don't know where you're going. And I think it's as simple as that.
Pip, there's a few questions here in relation to the mental health work. And I suppose it leads into the question, that's not something traditionally Landcare groups have been, not saying it's not something they haven't done, but it's not something that it's been recognised that they do. So can you actually just unpack why Little River focused on that issue?
Yeah. So in the drought, not too far up the road from our catchment, in a space of a couple of months, they lost, I think it was 7 farmers to suicide. When you actually stop and think about that in terms of small communities, because that was a small community where that happened. So we have 2 townships that we centre around. Yeovil has a population of about 270 people. Cumnock has a population of about 250. If you stop and think about the impact of a suicide on your community, it's ginormous. So in terms of losing someone that has inherited knowledge, you know, and whether that's about how you actually manage that particular farm, that landscape, you know, you can't afford to lose those treasure chests out of your landscape. The impact that that has on families, you don't want families to fall apart and leave your community completely. You know, that has a flow-on effect about what it impacts. That impacts volunteers in your community. That could be a volunteer on your Landcare group. It impacts, you know, children in a way that you cannot describe. And so seeing what happened out west and recognising that we couldn't afford to have that happen here was what drove that. And certainly, I think everyone on our management committee, our staff members, we've all been touched by depression or suicide in one way or another, whether it's friends, family, whatever it might be. So we know what it means. And I don't think at the time when we started this back in 2006 that we fully realised that whole Landcare is people care thing. We recognise it now, that it is so intrinsically linked that you cannot afford to avoid it. Like we've just seen, there's some interesting research out there that by people being engaged in Landcare, that it improves their mental well-being. You know, it's by doing natural resource management, you are thinking forward. You're looking ahead. You know, planting trees today, what they mean in 100 years' time is very significant. So we have to have people that are doing natural resource management. To do it, they need to be, you know, thinking well. And we adopted the line of healthy minds, healthy families, healthy farms. And yeah, you know, everything is interlinked, and we have to be very systemic in how we think. And that's probably, you know, whether we fell into it in one way and we've come out of it another, we're certainly not out of it, we're very much in it, but it probably wasn't planned the way it's developed all those years ago, but we wouldn't turn our back on it now.
Good points, Pip. We'll just try and move on to the last couple of questions quickly, so if we can deal with a couple in short succession as we're getting close to the end. Question here in relation to, you mentioned earlier about ensuring competitive efficiency, and I suppose there's a couple of questions that emerged how does Little River see itself? Does it see itself in competition with anyone in particular, and how does it fit with such as the catchment management associations and, you know, that whole how do you see Little Rivers and other Landcare groups part in that landscape?
Yeah. Look, I think we don't sort of stop and say we're in competition with anyone, but we also don't stop and say we're not in competition with anyone. The reality is that it's a competitive world for funds, and we have to try and figure out what our competitive advantage is over anyone and everyone else. And as I said, we're not so much looking at other Landcare groups when we do that now. It's looking about how we're competitive against government bodies, councils, industry bodies, those sorts of things, and being aware of what makes us competitive over those guys, but also knowing what their competitive advantage is over us. But in terms of the Landcare family, we are so happy to share anything and everything. There's no need, for anyone to have to reinvent the wheel. And so, collaboratively, we're all out there trying to achieve the same thing. At the end of the day, my job's to try and keep this organisation open and going forward. And, I've got to do what I've got to do to make that happen. But at the same time, one of my critical roles in my job description is about promoting Landcare, being an advocate for Landcare, and contributing on every level possible to that, so that Landcare can be a united front well into the future. So I don't think we can say we're not competitive or we are competitive. It's a meshing of everything, and knowing at which point in time what hat are you wearing and how does it need to be delivered.
And Pip, in a larger Landcare group like Little River, how do you see the, I suppose, the balance and the relative, I'll use the term relative value, but that's probably not a good choice of words, between how important do you still see the, in essence, the volunteer component of Little River?
Look, it's quite interesting when you stop and think about all the different forms of Landcare that are out there, bush care, coast care, and all the rest. Our level of volunteerism, it's probably not as great as what you see in bush care groups. Like our committee are true volunteers. They give all their time for nothing. I do still look at all of our farmers who participate in our programs, even though there's incentive in there for them to do it, they are still volunteering because it's, they're doing something for a future legacy. They're doing this for future generations. So we look at that. It's amazing. We've got a young girl who's actually volunteering with our organisation for the next 4 months. She's a master's student and wanted 4 months of work experience before she goes into full-time employment. So it's funny where volunteers come from. We welcome them in every way. We had a team of Rabo Direct senior management from Sydney that have come out and done tree planting. So volunteerism for us probably isn't so much in our backyard, but it's probably pulling it from other forms.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It does illustrate the difference over the Landcare movement. Yep. A lot of rural-based Landcare groups are dealing with predominantly land managers working on farms, on private property, as opposed to, I suppose, a more clearer volunteer-based working on public lands. And the needs of those two organisations can be quite different.
Very.
Because of that structure. But I think we've also got a number of questions there relating to the structure of Little River, some of the funding items. What we might do, unfortunately, we've run out of time today, is I'll have a discussion with Pip about trying to flesh out some of that organisational component that we could put up on the web there, if Pip's happy to, so people can get an understanding of how the group works. Sure. Pip's contact details, there's also some requests in there again for Pip's contact details. This, there'll be a recording of this webinar up on our site and also sent to everyone who's registered within, say, the next day or two. So all of those contact details will be on the PowerPoint that you've seen on the screen here. And just as I said, we'll try and get back over a reasonable period of time to trying to get some replies to some of the questions that have come in today. And finally, I'd like to thank Pip for her time today. It's been a great presentation, Pip, and Little River is one of the very diverse group of Landcare groups that I'd like to put some illustrations, because you've been quite open in saying, well, we've had challenges, we've had problems, and this is how we've tried to step through them over the last few years. So to me, it's a good illustration for other groups to look at and help to just share more knowledge between the Landcare movement.
No, my pleasure, Brett. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned, the recordings will be up on the site soon, and I look forward to speaking with you at the next National Landcare webinar. Thank you very much.